Hello everyone. In this video, let's walk through deploying a .NET Web API application on an Amazon EC2 instance. Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud, also known as EC2, provides scalable on-demand compute capacity in cloud. It's essentially a virtual server in Amazon's data center, allowing you to run applications without the need of a physical server. In this video, let's dive into creating an Amazon EC2 instance, connecting to it and setting it up with the .NET runtime, uploading our .NET application to it, and running the application in EC2 instance. By the end of this video, you will understand how to leverage Amazon EC2 to host your .NET applications. This video is sponsored by AWS and is part of my AWS ECS series. Hello everyone. If you're new here, my name is Rahul and I make videos on .NET, Cloud, and DevOps. So let's navigate into the AWS console and go to EC2. You can also search this from the list here, so you can type in EC2 and navigate to EC2 from the services list in here. This is where you can start creating your EC2 instance and manage them in AWS console. Now, this video won't dive into the different EC2 features and concepts. Instead, we are focused on one practical outcome, that is to deploy our .NET applications. I will be covering more details on some of the specific concepts of ECS and how to leverage them in future videos in this series. So please make sure to be subscribed to get notified when those come out. So let's navigate into the instances in this right tab or from here to create a new Amazon EC2 instance. So let's navigate to the Launch Instances button on the top right and click that to create a new instance. So this asks us for our name. So let's specify Hello World EC2 as our EC2 instance name. Now we'll need to choose an OS image for our application to run on. Now, since .NET 8 runs on Linux, we can choose Linux in this specific case. Now, I could choose any of the images that's available here based on your application needs and hosting requirements. Now, in this case, I'm going to stick with the default Amazon Linux 2023, which is also enabled for the free tier. So if you don't have an AWS account and want to try this out for yourself, go ahead and sign up for the free tier. I'll put a link for that in the descriptions below. So let's make sure to keep this selected and let's go to the next option. So in this case, it also selects the architecture to be 64-bit. Now, the next main option that you need to select is the instance type. So this gives us different instances that's available based on, again, the requirements our application needs. So this basically puts a constraint on the number of CPUs, the memory, etc. that you get. So you can look at different instance tiers and select one of them that meets your application criteria. Now, since I'm going to just host a simple API application, I'm going to again stick with the default option, which is also eligible for the free tier. So I'm going to choose t2.micro and keep going with the options. Now, to connect to the EC2 instance once it's created, we can create a new key pair. So let's click this to create a new key pair. So let's give this a name. So we are going to give this as Hello World key pair. Let's choose RSA and let's also keep the format as PEM. And this will be prompted to download as soon as we create the key pair. So let's create this. Let's make sure to save this in a location that we can use this before. So let's click Save As, which is going to prompt the location. So let's save this into a folder for Hello World EC2. And let's click Save. So that's going to save this key pair PEM format, which we can use later in this video. So let's keep going. So with the network settings, you can create a new security group, which is going to happen automatically with these specified details. So in this specific case, it is allowing SSH traffic from anywhere. You can limit this to specific IP address or also give a range of IP addresses in here. Now for this demo, I am going to keep this as connecting from anywhere. But this is something that you will have to consider when creating your applications to restrict this so that you have a better control on how these instances can be accessed. Since we are hosting an ASP.NET API application, we will need to expose some port for our application to expose that on. However, we will come to that later in this video. So let's keep going and let's configure the storage for this instance. So you can decide to add new volumes or choose the amount of storage that you need in here. Now this again depends on your application needs and you'll have to change this based on that. Now for now, I'm going to leave that as a default and create the launch instance. Now, this is going to create a new EC2 instance and launch it for us. Now, essentially, an EC2 instance is a virtual server on the cloud that is running on the Amazon infrastructure. Now, we can go to this instance, which will be created by now. So you can see that it is right now in the pending state. So once we refresh this, it should soon come back into a running state, and it is on a running state. Now we can navigate into the specific instance to see the details of that instance. Now inside here, you can find the public IPv4 address and also the IP address for this specific EC2 instance. You can also look at the details of the image that we chose and the other relevant information. So now let's connect to this instance. So for that, we can navigate to this Connect tab, and it will give you different options on how to connect to this instance. So we can use the SSH client and use SSH to connect to this. So let me open up my terminal here, which has already SSH enabled. So let's navigate into the folder that we pasted this new key into, and let's connect from here because we have the key pair inside this. So this has the command that is required. So you can use SSH-i, the key pair value, and we can also specify the instance that we need to connect to. So let's do that. So let's copy this. Let's navigate back into the terminal and use that command. Now, since this key pair is new, it is asking to confirm whether we want to use it. So let's specify yes. And this right now throws an error for me. It's saying it's an unprotected private file, and it is required that your private key files are not accessible by others. So if you look back into the Connect tab, you can see that it's mentioned here that we might need to ensure that the key is not publicly viewable, and you need to run the chmod 400 command on the file. Now, this is on the Linux environment. Now, on Windows, you could also ensure that the sharing for that file is restricted. So if I navigate into that folder, let's right-click this file and say Properties. And let's go to the Security tab in here. So now you can see there is a scope of everyone for this particular file. So let's go into Advanced and fix that. So we can first disable the inheritance because that is how that file is getting all these access. So let's say remove all inherited permissions from this object. And let's make sure to add myself, who is right now using it. So let's select my principal. Let's check that name, and let's add this specific principal to have permissions or full control on this file. And let's click OK. So now only I have access to that file. So let's click Apply, and let's come back to the console. Now there's also a PowerShell script that you can use for that, which I will link in the comments below. So let's navigate back. Let's clear this, and let's try using the same command again to connect to that instance. So this time it is connecting successfully. So you can see here that we are connected into that EC2 instance, and I can run commands on it and see what is inside that. So if I specify ls-a, it's going to show all the files inside that particular EC2 instance. So now that we have an EC2 instance which has the Amazon Linux image, let's see how we can run our .NET application. So for this, we need to first install the .NET runtime. So since I don't intend to develop applications on that particular EC2 instance, I don't need the SDK in there. All I need is the .NET runtime. So let's navigate to the .NET website. So let's navigate back. So let's go to .NET 8 on Google, and let's navigate to the Microsoft official site for .NET 8. Now inside here, we have the option to download the runtime. So since we are going to run an ASP.NET application, I'm going to choose the ASP.NET Core runtime. So let's choose the Linux option and choose the binaries and navigate to the x64 link. Now this is going to prompt a link to download on this machine, but I just want this to be downloaded directly on the EC2 instance. So let's close that. Let's copy this URL that we can choose to directly download this particular runtime, and let's navigate back into our console. Now, in this case, we can use the wget command and paste in the URL that we just copied. So let's execute that on the EC2, and that's going to download that particular binary into that particular instance. So if I now try ls, you can see that that file exists on that EC2 instance. Now let's extract this files so that we can start using the .NET runtime. So if we navigate back into here and go to the SDK tab for the same Linux instance, you can see how to unzip the file instructions. So let's copy this and let's run this inside our instance. So all this is doing is creating a new directory .NET and extracting that particular archive into that directory. So let's also make sure that the file name is correct on that particular archive. So let's navigate back into a console to get the archive name. So in this case, this is ASP.NET Core dash runtime instead of this particular .NET SDK. So let's open Notepad and let's make sure to fix that and paste the copied one. And then let's also make sure to fix the file name. So in this case, we can grab this from here and use this instead. So let's navigate back and let's specify this file inside here. So once done, let's copy this and let's run this inside our console. So let's clear the screen and let's run this in here. So this is also setting up the .NET path root and also the .NET root on this machine. So once we have run that, let's do ls again, and it has already created the .NET folder. Now if I run the .NET command, you can see that the .NET command is working. So this is install the CLI, and it's also set up the path on this particular EC2 instance. So now if I specify .NET dash dash list runtimes, this will show the runtimes that's available on that EC2 instance. And as expected, you can see 8.07 is available on the machine. Now, exporting the path and specifying this is only going to make it available for this specific connection. Now, if you want this as part of the EC2 instance, every time you connect to it, you'll have to add it to the startup profile or the bash profile on that specific instance. So for that, let's run again a few commands. So let me copy and paste that. And let's run that. So all we are doing is putting this exact same thing into the bash profile file. So let's run that. And if we look at the bash profile file that exists on this machine, so let's navigate into the bash profile, and you can see that has added this 2 lines in here. So this means anytime I'm going to disconnect and connect back to this, the .NET command is going to work. So let's give that a try. So let's specify exit and let's try connecting back to it again. So let's SSH again. Let's specify .NET, and you can see this is still working. So now that we have set up .NET on the EC2 instance, let's deploy an application into here. So let's create a new folder for our application. So let's create a directory. So let's call this as Hello World EC2. So I need to use mkdir instead of md and specify Hello World EC2. So let's create that new directory in there, which is where we are going to copy our .NET application. So let's open a new tab to create our application. So let's navigate into that same folder that we pasted our original PEM file, and let's create a new project. For that, we can specify .NET new, specify that it's going to be a web API template, and let's also specify the name for that project. So in this case, I'm going to specify Hello World EC2. So this is going to create a new project for us. So now if I navigate back into that folder, you can see that we have a new .NET API project created with the program.cs. Now I'm not interested to make any changes to this because it already has a default endpoint in there. Now to publish this into a specific folder, I can specify .NET publish-o and specify a folder. So I can simply specify publish, which is going to be in the root of this application. We can also specify the OS that's required to be targeted. Now since I am running my local machine on Windows, it is going to default targeted for Windows. However, since our EC2 instance is in Linux, I'll need to target this for Linux. So let's specify --OS and let's specify Linux as the target. Now this is going to create a new build and it's going to publish it into the publish folder, and the output will be targeted for the Linux environment. So let's navigate back into a folder, and here you can see that we have a publish folder, and if you navigate into it, you can see the files inside there. So we can use this to host this application in our EC2 instance. So let's see how we can do that. Now again, I'm manually copying this from my local machine just for demo purposes, and in a real world application, you would be doing this using a build deploy pipeline. For now, I just need to copy these folder files into the EC2 machine. For that, let's navigate one level up where we have the PEM file to connect to. Let's use the scp command, which is a secure copy, specify -i and specify the hello world.pem file. Let's specify the folder that needs to be copied. So in this case, that is going to be Hello World EC2 and the publish folder. So let's specify the publish folder. And since we need to copy all the files inside that, let's use the star wildcard. Now let's also specify the EC2 instance name. So if we come back to our AWS console, you can see here the EC2 instance name. So let's copy that again and let's use this inside here. Now we can also specify the directory inside that. So let's specify colon and let's specify at the root directory. Let's navigate into the Hello World EC2 folder that we already created. So let's specify Hello World EC2, and that's all that's required. So this will copy all these files from my local machine into the EC2 instance. So let's run this and see this. So you can see that these files are getting copied onto our EC2 machine. So let's switch back to our EC2 console and let's navigate into that folder. So let's navigate into the Hello World EC2 folder and let's list the files in there. So you can see all these files are copied inside this. Now, if I was to run this DLL, so let's simply use .NET, the DLL name, which is going to be Hello World EC2.dll. And we can also specify an explicit URLs if required. So you can specify the URLs property and you can specify http://. And since this is going to run defaultly on port, let's say 5000, let's give that as the URL. Now, in this case, we get back an error. So it says that could not find a valid ICU package installed on the system. Please install that or specify the system.globalization.invariant to true if you want to run with no globalization support. So for now, since I don't need any globalization support, let me do exactly that. So in this case, I can again set the variable. So let's specify export and let's specify the globalization invariant to be true. So let's specify that as 1. And now again, this is only applied to my current connected instance. And if you want this to be there, you can put this in the bash profile. But if you need globalization support, you can also do that and install the package as required. So let's run our application again. So in this case, let's also specify the HTTPS URL. So let's specify HTTPS and specify the 5001 port. So this is the default that is configured for this application even inside the app settings. So let's specify both HTTP and the HTTPS. So now let's run this again, and this time the application is running successfully. Now if we need to connect to this, let's open a new tab and let's connect to our SSH instance again. So let's use the command SSH and let's connect to that instance again. So let's specify the wget and we can also specify the URL. So in this case, that's going to be localhost 5000. So that's where it is listening. And we have the weather forecast, which is the default endpoint in the ASP.NET API. So let's use that. And you can see here, this is 200 OK, and it has received the application.json and it has saved that into weather forecast.1. So if I run the ls command, you can see the weather forecast command, and let's use cat and output that inside this console. So you can see we have returned back the valid weather forecast JSON data that's available as part of the default ASP.NET Core API. So right now our application is running on this EC2 instance and we are able to connect to it from the EC2 instance itself. Now if I navigate back to our instance details, let's copy the public IPv4 address for that instance and let's try navigating to the 5000 port for that. So now if I do that, you can see this is still spinning and it's going to time out after some time. This is because we haven't exposed port 5000 from that EC2 instance for public access. So if I navigate back to the EC2 instance and navigate to the security group, you can see here right now we only have the TCP port that can be accessed from anywhere, which means we need to edit these rules to allow the port 5000 and 5001 on which our application is running. So let's navigate into the security groups. Let's say edit inbound rules, and here let's add a new rule. So let's specify the ports as 5000 and 5001, and let's specify IPv4 anywhere. Let's also make sure to leave a comment. So let's say hello world EC2 so that we remember what this is for. Let's also add another rule for the IPv6. So let's specify the ports again. So that's 5000 and 5001. Let's specify IPv6 in this case. And let's also specify this same description. Let's save the rules. So when we run the application, we need to specify the dash URLs. I missed specifying a star in the URL format. So let's specify that and run this again. So you can see that the application is starting again. So let's navigate back to our EC2 instance. Let's copy this URL and let's go to the 5000 port and on the weather forecast endpoint. So let's specify weather forecast, and this is going to hit that API endpoint and return back the contents as expected. So you can see how our application is returning the data from this weather forecast endpoint. So if I was to hit this again, it's going to randomly return the data, which is what the default ASP.NET Core API template implements. Now, in this specific case, you can see here that this is not secure because we haven't set up any certificates or anything on our EC2 machines. If you want to learn more about that, let me know in the comments below. I hope you are now able to successfully run your .NET applications inside an AWS EC2 instance. In future videos, I'll cover more concepts on EC2. Thank you and see you soon in another video.